Yeah, going. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's planning meeting. My name is Mike Johnson. I'm chair of the planning committee. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is also recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. Thank you. Move to the agenda. Appointment of substitutes.
There are no substitutes, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Declarations of interest from members? None? Oh, sorry.
I just want to mention that I know Mr. and Mrs. Bennett socially, but I haven't discussed their applications with them.
Thank you, Councillor Bissett. Minutes of the previous planning meeting. Do them page by page. Page 1, 2, 3. Did we correct the box to both? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11. And it only took 2.5 hours. Thank you. I will sign them at the end of the meeting. We move to item 4, Conservation Advisory Panel. Happy to note those. Thank you. Public participation?
There's no public participation, Chair.
So we move to public representation, and we have, first of all, we're going to go to agenda item 13, which is the application for variation for the land at Sheriff Street. The person wishing to speak is Mr. Evans. Thank you, Mr. Evans. You have 5 minutes. Your 4.5 minutes is up.
Okay, so firstly, I believe the description of the application to be incorrect. It states that condition 1 of planning approval, the 2019-119-00693 REM, and yet in the decision tracker of the application, it says conditions 1, 7 and 18 are subject to amendments as part of this application we're considering today. So that, I think, should be corrected. And in condition 7 is of particular importance since it requires the development be carried out in accordance with the approved plans and documentation, the documentation of which, So yeah, the supporting information has design changes set out, which I would argue are still considerable and unsatisfactory. It's on the matter of design I wish to speak about because development should be designed to respond to the special characteristics and distinctive features of a place, which can include the predominant architectural styles and or building materials. And the proposed development is in a prominent position due to its elevation. It's the vistas you get coming down Tolladine Road, and no attempt has been made to soften the massing of the proposal, which could be achieved through depth, whether that be balconies, whether they hang off the building or within the internal perimeter of the building. The proposed development therefore responds poorly to the prevailing scale and grain of the surroundings and underplays the effect of the proposal in terms of dominance and bulk. Whilst I don't oppose the scale per se, because it's a sustainable location, brownfield land, of which there is a presumption to reuse land effectively on these. There's ways of delivering such scale in a more sympathetic manner. And this is laid out within the National Design Guide, which advises that well-designed places come about through making the right choices at all levels. And it says, paraphrasing from paragraph 43, that well-designed new development needs to be integrated into its surroundings, physically, socially and visually. And it needs to be carefully sited and designed and demonstrably based upon an understanding of the existing situation. So that includes patterns of built form, both historic and now. And that informs the layout of the site. And again, you can also look at, you need to look at architecture prevalent in the area, including local vernacular, and other precedents that contribute to local character. And that informs the appearance and the materials, of which there's been little consideration to, because the brickwork is more of a clay-based brick, which gives a more of a sheen and a more of a smooth appearance, whereas the area is synonymous with a more buff, sandy brickwork, which softens the appearance and would be more sympathetic and in keeping with the area. And an English bond as well of the brickwork, because it should follow the character of the area. So I don't believe it's been shown that this scheme meets the important criteria as set out in the National Design Code and Guide, and therefore I think falls foul of the government's objective to build well-designed, beautiful, safe places as set out in paragraph 8b. So my recommendation to members would be to defer a decision on this application today. In the meantime, the local planning authority should seek the advice of the design review panel, whose comments are a material consideration in the determination of planning applications, and they will be able to provide some constructive conversation with the outcome of better design. And my full comments are available on the portal, and consider other matters such as placemaking, public realm and connectivity. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I made the unusual decision to let you speak first. Normally we would have had the presentation from the officer. The reason I allowed that, because I think I've already had an email direct from you. The sad reality is this scheme already has planning permission. This is just a variation, and that's all that we can consider today. That having been said, sorry, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. I will work. Go, Craig. Hopefully this works. Oh, no. Is that one? No. All right, we'll scroll through very quickly. There we go. Okay, so on the screen, Councillor, as you've stated, this is an application under Section 73 to vary the plans and the details of the application. And obviously, when we consider the variation to the approved plans, obviously we then have to make sure that all the other conditions are correct and relevant to the point at which we've reached, because there have been a number of discharge condition applications already submitted and approved. So in terms of the proposed layout, this is the proposed ground floor layout as now proposed. To highlight the changes, Councillor, on the left-hand side, the applicant has produced this comparison document. So on the left-hand side is what has currently got planning permission, and on the right-hand side is what is now being proposed. Principally, the change takes the block A, which is on the right-hand side, away from the corner, and in particular the retaining wall. And that has consequential changes then on the internal layout and some of the elevations as well. So again, you've got how that fits in, obviously site-wide master plan. This is phase 1, and hopefully will be the last time you see phase 1. Certainly in terms of any further amendments. As I say, that phase 1 is at the top, outlined in red, and then phase 2 is at the bottom, and in the middle is phase 3 and 4. The proposed amendments, again, also change some of the heights and layouts of the buildings. And again, if I just do that, you can see again a comparison of the scale. Again, on the top, you can see what's already been approved, and on the bottom, again, you can see without the shading on it. And again, this shows the slides as to how the comparison would fit in with the overall regeneration or the overall scheme, which also has detailed planning permission. And again, the detailed planning permission, how that shows again across the whole site. So again, comparisons between the two proposals. On the left-hand side as approved, and on the right-hand side as proposed. And again, you can see again the changes in that and how that has affected matters such as parking and how that's laid out, improvements in landscaping and such matters. Again, the first floor layouts. Again, you can see the changes in the bulk and mass. And again, the second floor layouts, again, you can see just how the units have reorganised themselves around, still around a central courtyard, still around the same principal access point. And the third and fourth floor, again, are identical. So again, some of the changes to the elevations. On the top is the current approved scheme, and to the bottom is the proposed scheme. And again, top it was what's been approved, and on the bottom what hasn't been approved. Again, some of the changes I think actually have improved the scheme. Again, you can see on the bottom that actually the use of different materials, particularly to the bottom two floors, give a kind of a differentiation. It is very much of its own architectural type and its own architectural style, because it's such a part of a much wider scheme. And we take on board all criticisms of it, and it will be, again, of its time. And again, you've got there the current approved plans and the proposed plans. And again, just keep going through all the different elevations. So it's, as I say, it is very much of its time. It is very much of its, and we think actually the improvements, or the amendments actually do improve the actual scheme, whether they were voluntary or otherwise. The scheme is what it is, and that is it. That's why, as I say, Council, going through all the reasons why planning permission was granted and all the conditions of the previous approval. We're of the view that the application is acceptable for the reasons set out in section 9 of the report.
Thank you, Andrew.
I have a question for Andrew about the reason for this change. I read that it's about the need not to encroach on this corner existing wall, but the some of the other buildings, such as Block B, are very close to that wall as well. So is it possible that the developers haven't, just focusing on that corner and not thinking about the entire wall?
Again, Councillor, that's the reasons given in the supporting documentation, and the retaining wall at the corner of Tolladine Street and Sheriff Street, I think it is. That's the wall where I've been informed, and again the supporting documentation sets out that the reason to bring it off that wall is for the structural stability of that wall, but there must be an engineering solution for the rest of it where it's not as tall, because obviously that's at its deepest point. Yeah, that's the reason why it's been pulled that way. And as I say, there were other consequential changes that you can see within the report, which move it away from other parts. But as I say, that's the reason given, and that's I've got no reason to suggest otherwise.
Any other questions? No? Forward the motion. Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you. We'll go to the vote.
Thank you, Chair. So just as a reminder, the motion before you is to recommend that Planning Committee grants the planning permission, subject to the conditions set out in section 9 of the report. Can I have all those in favour? Nine. And those against? Any abstentions? Thank you, that's carried. Thank you, Chair.
We will now move.
Just in passing, excellent presentation, I thought. Well,
Yeah. Shame it wasn't at the first, when it was first granted.
Well, yes, but no, never mind.
All right, we'll now move to agenda item 9, the swimming pool. And I think Councillor to speak, but after we've had the officer's presentation. You've got to find it now, haven't you? You've gone. It doesn't work now.
So this is application 21/00916/FUL. It's for the redevelopment of the former swimming pool. For those members who've had the opportunity to just take not too long a walk, but you will notice on the site that the former swimming pool, its building itself, has now gone from the site, that obviously the building is hoarded at the front and to the rear. So it's an application where we are the landowner, and it's also a major application, so that's the reason it's for you today. So let's move on. So this is the site as was before the demolition took place. You can see there the swimming pool building in the middle of the site, and obviously pedestrian access at the front and access to the car park at the rear off Chestnut Street. The application proposes a series of number of dwellings of mixes, tenures and types. As I say, these are all we set out within your report. I think it's paragraph 7.8 where we set out the the proposed tenures and types, but we also set that out earlier in the report as well. So there's a number of one-bed properties and a number of apartments. Those are principally at the front of the site, and you can see there the scale of the apartment building at the front in relation to the buildings next door. It then proposes a terrace of properties, again trying to match the surrounding area in terms of built form. And in the middle of that you can see two gables. That is a further apartment block, and obviously there is new tree planting being proposed, new landscaping, and obviously gardens to the rear of the houses and again the apartments in the terrace. So I'll move on to the, sorry, wrong way. So these are some of the photos. Again, these were taken, these are parts of the design access statement, but again they show the site before the demolition took place. Again, you can see here the church in the background on the top left. And again, looking over to the Lansdowne Crescent on the top left there, you can see again the parking issues on Chestnut Road and Chestnut Street. And again, there you can see the size and the scale of the former swimming pool building, and obviously that sitting in the centre of the site. Get the right one. So, as Councillor Barnes indicated, just to have a look at obviously the scale of the buildings in relation to the proposal to the existing properties. Obviously the scale of the swimming pool building is now moved forward to the front of the site, but again with the annotation, balconies, various pitches reducing the height, we feel that it fits in quite well with the surrounding area. It is a little bit taller, and I'll show that on in a little bit. And again, this is the terrace, showing again an example of the house, the first house as you come up. And again, the parking being proposed at the front. I should add, this also includes a residence parking for residents of Chestnut Street and the surrounding area. Again, the details of that management would be dealt with through planning condition, including electric vehicle charging point. But we know that one of the conditions, it indicates that there will be 20% of electric vehicle charging points on the residence car parking area, and also all these will have electric vehicle charging points as well. So looking at the rear of the site, again looking from the car parking to the proposed apartment building, again you can see there a view of how that fits in with the character of the area. Some of the existing trees being retained, and indeed they are still there on site when I was there this morning. And again, a small green area of private amenity space. The right of way, which is there on the left there, is already existing, and that's a local right of way, but that will be retained and designed into the scheme. This is the landscape master plan, and there you can see, as I say, the trees on the bottom left behind the apartment buildings. And again, you can see at the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the residence parking area for, I think it's 26 car parking spaces. And again, you can see there, again, the blue and the pink are the houses, and the orange are apartments. An example of the houses being proposed. You've seen quite a lot of the apartments. This is one of the houses in the terrace. Solar panels to help with obviously low carbon and energy efficiency. Again, traditional style, but with contemporary touches, I think I would say. And again, another example of the house, slightly different house type, but again, showing that. And again, this shows where the site levels and the floor levels are. So the dotted lines are the floor levels for each level of the apartment buildings, and that shows it again in relation to the neighbouring properties. And again, you can see the floor levels, and the properties on the left, I think, are Chestnut Street. And again, that's the front elevation of the apartments. And again, I put these slides in just to make sure that you were able to make that assessment. And again, this is because obviously there are properties, they're not in isolation, so you can see a street scene of the houses and how they would fit together. And that's the apartments, the smaller scale apartments. And then again, you can see there, that's a street scene of how the site would look if you were able to take such a long way back, so to speak. And again, you can see the tree planting in these street scenes and those kind of things. That's it. As I say, for Councillor Lewis, in the late paper, you've got two comments that have been raised by Councillor Lewin. The air source heat pumps, we note that they can be noisy, but they will be noisy for future residents as well as existing residents, and it's our assumption that they would be fitted in a manner that there would be noise, they would be acoustically designed so that future residents of the development wouldn't be adversely affected. If appropriate, councillors, we would be happy to add a condition just to see the precise details of those. And secondly, there is the 2.7 metre high wall. I think it's slightly lower on the swimming pool side, but again, if we are proposing a condition for details of the boundary treatment, including that wall, as an additional condition, should members be minded to approve, subject to the section 111, because we are the landowner and we can't enter a section 106 with ourselves. That's how a section 111 legal agreement means that the sale can take place, and then that will then turn into a section 106 agreement once we are able to enter that with the developer. That's it, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I just want to confirm something, please, because I've been going back and forth a little bit on this issue, which is the electric charging. I can see on the master plan that there are indicated positions for electric car charging, but it's only shown in the new car parking, and it's not actually on the drawing for the Chestnut Street car park. And I just want to confirm that we are going to get 20% charging within the Chestnut Street car park.
That is a condition, yes.
Thank you. And then my other item, again to do with car parking, is that we had a motion earlier this year to do with car sharing. And I think this is an absolute ideal location for a space for a community car club to be allocated. Ideally, I think it should be with the new car parking, because that is nearer the main road. And this would benefit the existing residents in the Arboretum, but also the residents that are coming to the site, where obviously we have got limited parking for the numbers of people who are going to be there, and it could actually mean, particularly if they're on low income, that they'd have access to a car when they needed it. There is evidence that people will go down from 2 cars to 1 car if they've got access to another occasional car. So I wonder whether that could be considered, please. If again I go to the conditions for the boundary, I live locally to the site, and many houses and boundary walls around the site are actually topped with a half-round blue brick coping. It's very characteristic of the area. Now, I know we've added this really nice low brick wall at the front of the site, which I think is very good and very in keeping. But if we could have a blue brick coping of some sort, I know that the half-rounds can be quite expensive, but even a nod towards the historic detail in the area, and because it's right at the front of the site, it will have a big impact on what people think when they're going past the site. And then my final point is that during the demolition process, I did get a lot of complaints from residents about the noise and the disruption. We went through a period where there wasn't much rain, there was quite a lot of dust. I know that the demolition contractors did their absolute best. They did some litter picking on the main road, for example, and they were very accessible as well. They did respond to phone calls and emails from myself and Councillor Barnes. But really, I know that the construction management plan will be a condition, and but what I want to say is that I think this is an absolutely crucial condition. And on a site that is so sensitive and surrounded by so many residents who've already put up with a lot of disruption, I would really like it if the contractor that is appointed would register with the Considerate construction scheme. This is a scheme which is a code of practice which strives to improve the impact of the construction industry and leave a positive legacy. So it looks at building a relationship with communities, caring for the environment and valuing their workforce. It means that the site is regularly inspected and scored, and actually the contractors themselves are rewarded, and they can show off about it, which is a great thing. You know, we want people to celebrate this kind of thing. But it also means that they'll be very conscious of preventing unnecessary disturbance to neighbours, reducing the nuisance to the community. It involves notification in good time of particularly noisy activities. We have got a number of residents who are on shift working and who also work from home, so they could make alternate arrangements if it's going to disturb their sleep, for example. And also limiting, obviously highways will be very interested in limiting the vehicle size, which will be very important because the road is quite narrow. But also it's things like little things that will make a difference. You know, please litter pick, and if there's a big period of dust, maybe go around and have a car cleaning day or something. You know, it's just those little nice things that will build a really good relationship with the contractor who's going to be on site for a long time. And if we don't do something really positive, I think we're going to put residents in a lot of misery. So I'd really love that to be considered, please. Okay, I think that's me done, if that's all right.
Thank you. I'm not sure how many of those we can accommodate, but over to you, Andrew.
Thank you. So you will see in the construction management plan measures to control noise and dust from construction activities. We can't force somebody to sign up to the considerate contractor thing, but as a planning authority, but I'm sure property colleagues can do that if necessary. Again, but that would be outside our remit. And as I say, in terms of other aspects, of course, yes, we will continue to manage and monitor the development if members. Sorry, go on, Karen.
I was coming to you next.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Sorry, Andrew. Yes, at the Highway Authority, we do encourage contractors to be part to sign up to the Considerate construction scheme, and we've included that within our condition for the Kent. So, as Andrew has said, we can't force them to do so, but we do actively encourage them to do that. And through obviously the Section 278 scheme, we will insist, we will try our best to insist that they do that.
That leaves the blue brick issue. Can we require that?
Again, that will be part of the materials condition that we've got. So again, in the boundary treatment condition, so the materials of that we can work with the developer to ensure that that is part of the finish.
Thank you. And finally, car sharing, which I'm not quite sure where that fits in the.
We can look at that in terms of the because there is a car park management condition, and I think it's condition 10, a car park management strategy. So whether or not that forms part of the sustainable transport solution, then that might be one option to consider.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the committee, this is a really good example where the role of the council as a local planning authority needs to be seen as very distinct from the role of the council as a corporate organisation and as a landowner. And I know that can be really difficult for all of us at times. I'm aware that there's been some discussion about the car club initiative, but my understanding is that although that's not something that we can require on the back of a specific planning policy, so it wouldn't be a reasonable planning request. Clearly, it is the sort of thing that we do generally encourage, but it's more something that is for discussion between the council as the landowner and the future purchaser. But I understand it's not something that has to date been... Sorry. I understand that to date it's not something that has been required as part of the sale or offered by the applicant. So it's very unlikely that that could be secured. But safe to say it is something that we do generally encourage. Just to pick up on the point about the blue brick coping, if I may, my colleague is absolutely right that it would be part and parcel of the discharge of condition relating to external materials. However, I'm just wondering if it's a particular point that the committee is concerned about, it could be that you could follow the recommendation but with a slight amendment that just delegates to your chairman and vice to amend one of the conditions just to make specific reference to that detail, that design detail, just so that we can be more confident about securing it. And we could also just look to see whether before the issuing of a planning permission, we just require an additional drawing on that. But we're guided by the committee as to whether you feel it's reasonable to go to that extent. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question to Ms. Hanshett. I know she's looking forward to it. Very simple one, Mr. Chairman. Can she just confirm that the parking requirements are in strict accordance with the Streetscape design guide, in terms of numbers of parking spaces, numbers of bedrooms?
Thank you, Chair. I can confirm that it fully complies with the adopted Streetscape design guide. In terms of the parking numbers, there is also the visitor parking and the additional 26 car parking spaces that the applicant is providing to alleviate some of the on-street parking issues in the location.
Are we now in general debate? Oh, thank you. I just wasn't 100% clear. Right. Demolition phase of the swimming pool had public consultation before it happened. Because of COVID, there was no public meeting for these plans. And I know that there's been a lot of representation on the website, but I think it's disappointing that there has been no public meeting about this. That's point one. I think generally this is an okay scheme, and I know that the residents are broadly supportive. However, there are real issues about the 26 parking spaces on the east side of the site, which exist at present, and they exist there because residents of Chestnut Street, when the swimming pool was built, they gave up part of their gardens. And the deal was that they would then have parking next to the swimming pool site because there wasn't enough on-street parking. Now, as houses have been sold, the right to those spaces has gone. I think there are 16 residents still in that street who have a right to use those spaces, which leaves a few extra. Now, the Arboretum's now got a parking scheme, and residents pay for the privilege of parking outside their homes. We don't know exactly how these 26 parking spaces are going to be carved up in the future, and I think it's really important that we get the details sorted. Now, residents have said that they would like charging points on those 26, and if it's 20%, then there's five charging places. We also, as a residents' area, have said that they would like to be involved with a car club type scheme and have cars available for all Arboretum residents, so that because of the parking restrictions, people are less likely to have a second car and cause all sorts of extra difficulties. And I think all of that really needs to be built into the plan. And if it means that we remain in control of those 26 parking spaces, I think that's what should happen in honour of the arrangements that were made by residents previously. I think that, for me, is the one area that is a big problem, and that if we can get this straightened out so that there is a guarantee that people don't pay twice for a start. No, I understand that the new homes are going to have their own little parking scheme, which they'll have to pay for. If those 26 parking spaces are included in that scheme, people could be paying twice for the privilege. And that just seems to be really unfair. So I think it'd be better if those 26 should be left within the Arboretum parking area and administered on that basis.
Thank you for that. I'm not sure we can necessarily effect that through planning, but what I would suggest is, could we actually have a look at the legality of us retaining space? So let the developer build it, but we retain ownership of it, and then we could look to.
That's certainly something we could look into. I should reiterate, though, from a legal perspective, the rights granted for parking weren't actually permanent legal rights. It was dealt with by way of a licence, which is a temporary measure, which in theory can be revoked at any time. Obviously, they have been long-standing, but I think we should make clear they weren't permanent legal rights to park. And that's something that I think we need to be very clear on.
In response to that, the residents already have few parking spaces in the Arboretum. And to lose 26 would be outrageous, to be honest. We have enough problems as it is, and I think that that needs to be sorted. And that is a real sticking point for residents. And I think it ought to, we own it at present, we're in control at present, let's not lose that control.
I don't think in the application there's any intention of them being lost, is there? No.
Through you, Chair. The decision that you're being asked to make this afternoon is one on the application that is before you in terms of land use planning. And we appreciate it. It's really difficult, as I mentioned a moment ago, to sometimes distinguish between the role of the local planning authority and the other roles of the city council. But essentially, that's what you have to try and do. So I don't think it's a perfectly understandable concern, the concern that's being raised. But my advice is that it shouldn't be an impediment to you making a decision on the planning application this afternoon. And it's something that may be capable of being addressed in separate discussions and negotiations and as part of the disposal of the site. But it's really important that we focus on the planning issues this afternoon. We can certainly go into a bit more detail as to precisely what they are in terms of whether the proposal complies with relevant planning policies or not, technical issues, and what is a material planning consideration or what isn't. But at this stage, I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Jenny, or not?
I understand that it's not necessarily part of the immediate plan in front of us, but I don't think we should lose sight of it, because this is a really important issue for local residents, and I don't want it just to disappear, that we've given agreement and that's the end of it. We do need to have that extra consultation, because we haven't had a public consultation to now.
I think if we approve this, we're giving approval for the design and construction. There's a separate issue about the ownership and management of the 26 spaces. So we need to keep those distinct, and I'm sure Stephanie will take away the issue and introduce that into the sale process, I guess. Thank you. Any more questions?
I just mentioned these going back to the 19th century used to be pleasure gardens. That's why it's the Arboretum, and that's why it's Little London. And it was handed over to the City Council to be kept for the public. And we completely reneged on that over 100 years ago. We built all over the blinking place. So it's sort of sad, really. This, in a way, is the last bit we're reneging on. So I think we ought to get it as right as we possibly can. Here's my dilemma. I rather agree with the Conservation Advisory Panel's comments that the buildings are too regimented and they're just too great in a mass. Now, here's my problem. Do I think that that is of such weight that we should refuse plan permission? This is what's before us, and so it'd be blinking difficult to go that step further. But I would like, not on record, but at least I've said, I rather agree with the Conservation Advisory Panel that these places are not a thing of great beauty. Might have been better. As far as consultation is concerned, I'd recommend that any local councillor, if there's something come up with their issue, they get themselves together. I've always found that planning officers are willing to come along, whether it's in person or on Zoom or whatever, as they've done in the last 2 years in my area. So that's a good way forward for that. But I will be supporting this, and it will be a very heavy heart, actually, because it's like the City Council has finally let the whole area down.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to focus on two things. I'd like to pick up Andy's point about the Arboretum, because this is a very leafy area by its name as well as its character, and it would be tragic if we lost that. So there's a removal of 8 trees in this application. So clearly I would definitely want to see the replacement of 8 or more, because a betterment would be rather nice as well. So at least that to preserve the character of the area. But also I'd like to pick up Councillor Lewing's point about the blue brick coping, because I think that would be a very desirable design feature to tie in with the character of the local area. And I think, I've been going on about design codes lately quite a lot. We really don't have strong enough design codes. It's about time we said, this isn't quite good enough. Maybe we'd like something a little bit better, a bit more detail. So I'm relying on our officers to actually help us with that. Perhaps we can condition some of it, like the coping, for example. The trees, I think we've got something on trees, but I can't remember what it was. But certainly I would want to see a betterment rather than just... So can we please be clear about those things that we want in terms of design? I mean, the stuff we saw on screen, it looked like brown and beige, which looked absolutely ghastly. I just hope that they can do a bit better than that. Red brick is characteristic of most of the area, so that would be absolutely fine. But there needs to be some detail.
Could we condition planting and
So, yeah, we've got condition 4. I've just been counting on the landscape master plan. I think there's 17 new trees being planted. Again, I might have missed one. But certainly there's 10 on the south side of the site, and then I'm just counting between parking spaces and the others. So I think there is a betterment there in terms of new planting, I should say. And also they are retaining the 3 large trees that you can see on the site at the moment as well, assuming they don't fall down in the high winds between now and when they're occupied. But yeah, that is the intention, to keep those 3 big trees that are already there to give some substance to the landscape as soon as people move in. So I think there is a betterment there. Condition 4 does detail the type and species and number, and obviously that also includes then other landscaping to the public realm in particular. We can't control people's back gardens, but yeah.
No, thank you, but as long as we're protecting the roots when construction is happening, that'll work beautifully.
Sorry, I was going to suggest, Councillor, that I mentioned at the beginning that we were recommending an additional condition in relation to boundary treatment. I can add that into that condition, blue bit coping.
Thank you. Just a quick one. Just on page 72, that there were four sort of pictures, and it says there's a 4-storey detached house, but that must be a mistake. It's 2-storey.
Yeah, I've just spotted that one as well. I was just rereading it. It's a 4-bed, I should say, not 4-storey.
Sorry, I know I'm not proposing. I just wanted to say that I think this is an okay scheme, and there's some things I welcome about it very much, but I think we could have done better. I think the block at the front is too big and imposing. Admittedly, there are buildings like that in the Arboretum, but there isn't anything in the vicinity of that kind of mass. So I would have liked to have seen maybe that front building less tall, and maybe another smaller apartment block in the row of houses. And secondly, I think it's a great shame that the council and the developer couldn't work together to make this a zero carbon development. It's done well. We've got 35% of carbon emissions equalised. But this could have been a revolutionary prototype, giving a good example to other developers who come to Worcester. That said, I think on the whole, it's okay.
Thank you, Chair. I propose obviously with additional conditions with the recommendation. Are you saying? Okay, thank you.
Can I just confirm, Andrew, are we adding an additional condition or amending?
Adding additional condition in relation to boundary treatment.
Okay, so the proposal before you is to grant planning permission subject to a Section 111 agreement and the applicant entering into a Section 106 agreement. The conditions set out in Section 9 and delegating authority to the Corporate Director, Planning and Governance, subject to consultation with Chair and Vice Chair, to add an additional condition relating to boundary treatments. So if we can have all those in favour, please. (11). And so that's no objections, no abstentions? Great, that's carried. Thank you, Chair. Sorry, if I can just clarify, the vote we've just had should have also included the conditions that were in the late paper. I'm assuming nobody wants to change their votes? No? Okay, thank you.
Right, agenda item 10, 8 Bromwich Lane. They're not going to give you your slideshow.
Thank you, councillors. Okay, so this is application 21/01151 FUL for 8 Bromwich Lane. It's a change of use to a six-bedroom house to a house of multiple occupation. Sorry, change of use to a 6-bedroom house of multiple occupation. I'll put my teeth in. The application site outlined in red is there on the slide. And again, a bit closer in terms of the application site. I don't know whether, does it have a point? No, it doesn't have a pointer. Yeah, you can just see at the bottom there where number 8 is. Photo of the existing building. You can see the conservatory to the left-hand side. I don't know why the street has come off, but there we go. Again, you can see there the conservatory in the foreground, and again the property in all its glory. And again, it's the property at the end of the terrace and obviously the neighbouring building. The existing elevations and the proposed elevations again are presented there on that slide. Very minimal changes in terms of the layout and the external appearance. The existing ground floor plan is retained. So unusually for a HMO, it includes a lounge, a dining room, kitchen, and obviously a ground floor bathroom as well as the retention of the conservatory. So quite unusual for a HMO to have that much shared accommodation, but that is part of the supporting documentation, so to speak. On the first floor plan, at the moment there are 3 bedrooms, and again, the applicant is proposing 3 bedrooms again. Obviously, some of those are there is a shared bathroom as part of that, and then finally on the second floor plan, you can see again 6 bedrooms with an ensuite bathroom for bedroom 4 and bedroom 6, with bedroom 5 also having would then use the shared bathroom on either on the first floor or on the ground floor. Again, the proposed side views, no external changes of note. It's our view that while some of the bedrooms are small, and we're not going to hide away from those, the extent of the ground floor accommodation and the shared accommodation means there is a means of a way to escape being in such small accommodation. So we think that on balance, taking account of all the views and that have been expressed, that the proposals are acceptable and that therefore are recommended for approval subject to the conditions set out in section 9 of the report, Councillor.
Thank you, Andrew. Questions? Councillor Hmos.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. HMOs, we have an Article 4 direction for a reason. I think all the members know what that reason is. So obviously there is inevitable concern about the state of the property after a few months or a few years, what it looks like and how it affects the amenity of the local area. And this one, of course, is in a conservation area. It's a beautiful building, and I think the view would be how long is it going to stay well maintained as an HMO. If you look at paragraph 6.1, comments from neighbours and others, talks about a lack of parking along the road, which already suffers parking stress. That's true. Then the Conservation Advisory Panel says that it will be detrimental to the conservation area. And then if we go on, and this is a question from Ms. Hanchett, which perhaps you can answer when I've finished my comments. She says in paragraph 6.1, the proposed site for a 6-bedroom HMO meets the exception criteria for a parking-free development. Perhaps you could just explain what that's about, because I don't understand what that is. I mean, if people have cars, they're going to park. So parking free, I don't know what that concept is. But then if we move on, if I may, Mr. Chairman, to paragraph 7.16, we're talking about 6 rooms. The Conservation Advisory Group has already referred to says the bedrooms are very small, especially number 6. But if you look at them, and I think the committee really needs to make a decision on this, are we actually saying that one bedroom of 7.5 square metres is the sort of accommodation we want? Is a bedroom of 9 square metres the sort of accommodation we want? And as Mr. Thompson quite rightly says, I couldn't agree with him more. Well, you can go downstairs to escape from it. So we're building sits, which the best we can come up with is, well, don't worry, you can go downstairs to escape from it. Really? I mean, are we building rabbit hutches, or are we building accommodation for the future? And then if I can come on to paragraphs 7.21 to 7.23 about car parking, because this is an essential issue, and it always is. And I challenged Mr. Thompson, because I did give him advance notice of this question. Twice they used the word sustainable, and I think that this is the latest fashion, isn't it? What you say in planning these days is it's sustainable, which means ipso facto it's got to have planning permission because it's sustainable. Nobody's been able to explain what sustainable means. So could I ask Mr. Thompson, when I finish my comments, what sustainable is and what sustainable isn't? Because I don't know what it means. It just seems to be you bandy it around and say, well, we've got to grant planning permission because it's sustainable. I mean, it's a stupid word, but it don't seem to have a meaning. But if I can come back specifically to the question of car parking, Mr. Chairman, because it's not deliberate, but it is clearly misleading. Just because you live in a city centre, it doesn't mean you work in a city centre. You might live there, but you work somewhere else. I know people who, for example, live in Warndham, but they're cleaners, and they work in the city centre. They travel in and out. I know people who live in the city centre and commute to Birmingham. So what we're saying here is, well, if you're in an HMO in St John's, then obviously people will work locally, so you don't need a car. That's irrelevant, completely irrelevant, and it's false. Because people might have a car not for work, but they might want to keep it for the weekends when they go out, leisure and go to see friends and family and so on. So it doesn't matter really where you live. The desire to have a car is there. And if we're talking 6 bedrooms, we're talking from between, I would hope, guess between 6 and 12 people. And so it's a bit fanciful to say, as it says in 7.23, while no car parking is proposed, knowing that there could be up to 12 people there, I think, frankly, is irresponsible. So I do want some answers on that, Mr. Chairman, because this is not the only application where this has come up, but it's particularly relevant to this one. And again, it's directed to Mr. Thompson in his under the conclusion, paragraph 8.1, which is the non sequitur, which is Latin for it doesn't follow, it doesn't make any sense. In the end of paragraph 8.1, it says, harm to neighbour amenity and highway safety would not arise subject to the provision of the proposed 6 cycle parking spaces. What on earth has cycle parking spaces got to do with neighbour amenity, i.e. lack of parking, and highway safety? I mean, I just don't get it. I don't, bung in the word sustainable, and then you can say, well, we've got to grant planning permission. So I think they are very important points, Mr. Chairman. It's not the only application this applies to, but we really need to drill down, because what is being proposed here is something that is, I think, looking at the size of these rooms and in this location, it is really, and in, again, what the Conservation Advisory Panel has said, is really, it's inappropriate. I'm afraid it's inappropriate. And the point is that and the final question is, what is the management plan for this? Because once this has been knocked about and converted and goodness knows what, then we see all too often, don't we, that the owner, the managing agent, whatever, disappear. But who's going to maintain it? That's what I'd like to know. Who's going to maintain it? Because you've got 6, possibly 12 people coming and going. Who's going to look after it? This is why people are nervous about having HMOs near them, because we know the condition and the state they're usually left in. So who's going to be responsible for looking after the property? Owners will look after it, but people who run HMOs tend not to.
Thank you, Chairman. As members will be aware, the County Council's currently adopted Streetscape Design Guide does allow for parking-free development in locations that we consider to be close to facilities such as access to employment opportunities, health, leisure and shopping. This area complies with that. There are also parking restrictions in place outside to prevent indiscriminate car parking. So it does comply with the current adopted Streetscape Design Guide. As I mentioned to Chair and Vice Chair at the briefing earlier in the week, there is a new Streetscape Design Guide that will be available on our website shortly, where we will be giving different advice to this going forward, but we have to go with the advice that we've currently got in place, and this does comply with it.
Thank you for that. My second question was the number of occupants.
Yeah, the size of the bedrooms, Mr. Chairman.
How many people?
Well, I mean, it would be, I would suggest certainly 6, obviously 1 in each bedroom. Again, that would be part of the HMO licence and controlled by housing colleagues as to the appropriateness of the accommodation accordingly. That wouldn't be controlled or controllable by the planning authority.
That's not a planning issue either.
Again, that would be controlled by the Housing Services Councillor.
Okay.
Sure. Well, this is the problem, isn't it? We have this as the. It's actually Joy. Could you just do the curtain, please? Back the other way. I'm in the sunlight. You might or might not wish that to be the case. Yeah. No, it's the middle one, Joy. But this is the problem, Mr. Chairman. This is why I say it raises wider issues. We talk about, is it 6 or is it 12 people? It actually matters, because you could have 2 people who want a car each. And what we're saying is, well, there's nothing to do with us, housing. How can housing on earth control how many people are in an HMO? Tell me, how do they do it? Do they stand there watching who goes in and who comes out every day? We had this discussion before, Mr. Chairman, and we know as a matter of fact, housing cannot know or control or do anything about how many people are in there. This is why I say it's a reasonable assumption to have between 6 and 12. And then, of course, we talk about the state of the property, which is why one of the reasons we've got an Article 4 direction is because they end up dilapidated, bins hanging out, think that the property not maintained, the external integrity decaying, and this is the conservation area. And I still haven't had an answer, Mr. Chairman. One of the answers was on the size of these rooms. So this is why I've asked draw it to the attention of the committee, because Mr. Thompson said it himself. You can escape from these places by going downstairs. Is this what we want? I mean, do we want a room 7.5 square metres? Is this what we're providing? Is this? I mean, if we think this is appropriate, that's fine. But I'm out of it, because these are the slums of the future. This is if we think this is adequate for people to live in.
Can I just go back to car parking? Is the car parking, what assumption are you making about potential number of cars, or aren't you?
We don't make that assumption. As I said, if it's located in somewhere that we consider to be, I really don't want to use this word because I know Councillor Hmos is going to ask me to say exactly what it means, but in a sustainable location, then that's all we take into account. I mean, for a HMO elsewhere where we didn't consider it to be sustainable for a HMO of this size, we would ask for a minimum of 3 parking spaces.
sustainable. How long have you got? Because there's about 20 different definitions depending on who.
Just give me a few then.
But, you want to, yeah.
Through you, Chair. My colleague's perfectly able to answer the question, I'm sure, but I've volunteered. Sustainable development is often seen as development which is in compliance with national planning policy and a local plan, or in our case, the South Worcestershire Development Plan. And development that doesn't accord with national and local policy, you would normally expect to be regarded as unsustainable development. Added to that, there are, in terms of national policy and local planning policy, three roles, themes, or objectives to delivering sustainable development, and they relate to social, economic, and environmental roles, and we're supposed to look at those together in order to deliver what certainly the government regards as sustainable development. So it is rather a broad explanation, but I think that's a very good way of looking at it. You would first of all look at the NPPF, and then you would look at the SWDP, and the key there is sustainable development is something that broadly accords with the development plan. It doesn't need to accord with every single policy and every single aspect of individual policies. In terms of location, sustainable development, and that's just one aspect, but in terms of location, it's generally a location where someone that is living, working, or enjoying a leisure pursuit in an area has access to not just the private motor car, but other means of travel. Thank you, Chair.
Those sort of things we want to build for the future.
In terms of the National Space Standards Council, which we often look at, that would be appropriate for a one-bedroom, one-person accommodation. So a 7.5 square metre bedroom would be appropriate in National Space Standards.
Well, shame on them.
Straight away. I was going to ask that question because that does seem to be a very small bedroom, and you've referred to national space standards. Is that, if we were to say we're going to refuse this application because that bedroom is very small and we don't like it, is that a sufficient reason to refuse it? I suspect not. Because if we give permission for this HMO to go ahead with 6 bedrooms, then people will come along and say, I'd like to live in this HMO. And if they see a very small bedroom, then they have the choice to say, no, I don't want that room. Nobody is going to force anybody to sleep in that room. And whilst it might seem to us to be very small and not desirable, it might also seem to other people to be not desirable, which will end up with the situation that you'll have a 6-bedroom HMO with only 5 bedrooms occupied. I don't like the thought of a tiny little bedroom like that, but nobody is going to force anybody to go and live in it and sleep in it. And so whilst it's not desirable, it doesn't, to me, seem to be a good reason on planning terms to actually refuse this application. I think that my question to the officers would be, is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, I mean, the first assumption is, I've obviously quoted the National Space Standards. We haven't adopted those into our policies yet. So we have to take a case-by-case basis, but it is a good barometer as to the consideration of the NPPF, which does mention National Space Standards, but it requires you to adopt those standards into policy. And the same with parking standards, the same with housing mix standards, the same with all those kind of aspects. It expects the evidence to come forward. So if you were saying to me that you felt it was cramped, or there was something in the layout that meant that you felt that it wasn't a suitable suitable residential environment. You would then have to balance what we've done in the report and the ground floor accommodation on top of that. And that would then, that's the reasons why we've gone on balance approval. But there is, as I say, it's not substandard in terms of a one-person bedroom. So if you were seeking to put that argument forward, and as I say, it would be probably in accordance with, therefore, the HMO standards and the housing standards, although the Housing Act, because the Housing Act also adopts the national space standards. So I don't think, as I say, there is a reason for refusal, because that's, otherwise I probably would have put that down as a reason for refusal.
Councillor Agar.
Thank you, Chair. The development does have a number of things to recommend it. It complies, I suppose, with the Article 4 directions, so we have no issues there. The communal areas are very desirable, I think, and the fact that there's noise insulation between the rooms is a good idea, you know, if you're living quite close to other people. So those are all excellent. But I've got to say that these are box rooms, a couple of these, they're not really bedrooms. I mean, I remember the decent home standard with fondness, because it was better than what we have now. At the moment, it's as if we're in Tokyo and we're building, you know, very small pieces of accommodation. It's not, from that point at all, desirable. But I'm not sure if we're allowed to refuse it on those grounds. Perhaps we could take advice. I mean, there is this national standard, but if we don't like it, the size of it, are we actually able to refuse it on that ground?
If I could just give you a little bit of comfort about HMO standards in terms of room sizing. My understanding is the property would need a HMO licence. And there are guidelines as to the size of a room for occupation by a single person, by two people. It's not a planning consideration, but if the rooms didn't match those standards, it would be unlawful for them to be occupied. So whilst you're right, it's not a planning consideration about the size of the rooms for refusal, there is a separate scheme that might be able to allay your fears slightly.
I mean, I'd have thought residential amenity was something that should be our concern. Whether or not we can say it on those grounds, I don't know.
Somebody else, can you repeat the question, sorry?
Right.
Yes.
And that might impact on the very small bedroom. Might not. Owen, sorry.
What I was going to say is partially irrelevant because it's been done to death. It was about the sizes of the rooms. But one thing I did do this morning was I Googled the size of minimum rooms in prisons. And 5.5 square metres is the size of a single person prison cell. And 6.5 square metres is the size of a two-man prison cell. And some of these rooms are not much bigger than that. And I don't like the look of them at all. That's all I'm going to say.
I think these don't provide free meals either, Owen.
I think, Chair, I think we're edging into the position that's no business of ours. But if you look at the second floor plan, you come to the top of the stairs, and if you turn left, you go into HMO 4, which is bedroom 4, which is 19 square metres. If you go the other way, they've put a new corridor in, which gives access to HMO 6, which is our offending 7.5 one, and our HMO 5, which is a 9 square metre one. Wouldn't it have been lovely if they'd, rather than sticking that landing in there, they'd just had a flat either side, which would have been our 19, but each would have been about 19 metres square. Now, that would have been ideal, but if you're saying that we can't redraw this because it's not a planning condition, that's it. That's the end of the story. I can accept that.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little bit concerned what about the amount of space there is on the ground floor for people to go and enjoy? Is there a danger that we might approve this planning application, then they might come back and want to turn some of the ground floor into bedrooms, thereby making that top floor bedroom even a worse prospect? Is that something that we could control?
Yes, councillor, that would be something we would control. That would be a new permission, and obviously then you've got the materials to change in circumstances without the ground floor shared accommodation, and that would then perhaps raise further concerns from ourselves.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, it sort of fits in with the 15-minute city, 15-minute walk or cycle to schools, pubs, shops, bus routes. That's the positive. Very concerned that 3 of the rooms are 9 square metres or smaller. And also, I think it's unrealistic to think that all 6 rooms will only house people who cycle. I'm sure there'll be cars. And that lane is already congested and is used as a bit of a rat run to cut a corner off. So I think, based on all of that and the Conservation Advisory Panel's comments that it's unacceptable in its current format, then I think we ought to be rejecting it and asking to go back and have another look, particularly at room 6, which is the very small one, and try and do something different.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think in the light of the debate, I would move refusal on the grounds of the size of the rooms, over development clearly. And I think we do need to take a stand because, whatever the national standards are, we are tasked to use our judgment. And if our judgment is that these are not satisfactory, surely we shouldn't be doing it. And this is what I find bizarre, that we're doing things our judgment tells us not to. And everybody around the table is sensible, intelligent, trying to do our best. And we shouldn't be encouraging this kind of nonsense, because once this thing is built, you won't see the developers or their managing agents for a mile. So I recommend refusal for those reasons, and consistent with what Councillor Barnes has just said. Ask away.
Thank you. We've already had legal advice that licensing will deal with the size of the rooms and whether they're habitable if we give planning permission. So I'm asking the question, is that a valid refusal reason that we consider the rooms to be small? We may all feel that, but is it a valid planning reason to refuse? Bearing in mind the legal advice that is something that will go to a license, not a licensing committee, but will be a subject of licensing. Also, the mention about no parking, can we use that as a valid reason if our highways recommendation is no objection on the grounds of sustainable travel? So what I'm saying is, it's all very well for us to sit here and say, no, I don't like it because there's no parking. No, I don't like it because the rooms are too small. But are those valid reasons? Because if not, we're just going to refuse it. It's going to go to appeal, and then the appeal is going to be granted.
So in answer that is to your question, is the size of the rooms and the layout a valid planning objection or valid planning consideration? Yes, is the answer to that. Policy 21 says you can consider the size and the layout accordingly. So yes, you can consider that, and that is a valid planning objection, reason or consideration. and as I say, we've set out our view, taking account of all this stuff and all the balance in judgment. In terms of parking, obviously, you would be going against your highway authority. But equally, if you wanted to take a planning judgment that the lack of car parking would be detrimental to, would result in indiscriminate car parking, then again you would have to set out the reasons why you assume that would happen. And again, that would be, you would have to be clear and precise in that judgment, so that we would have a defendable reason based on, again, the policy, your planning policy, which is where not the Streetscape design guide, but if you apply the planning policy, policy SWD4 says you need to reduce the need to travel by private car. So that would not say to you that automatically that the policy doesn't necessarily support that. And equally, in refusing a planning application, you would have to show that that would be severe to highway safety. That's in accordance with paragraph 111 of the MPPF. So the short answer is it's more complicated for the highway safety argument, but as I say, again, it's a material judgment that you would have to make as a committee.
Mr. Chairman, that's helpful, but Ms. Hanchett can confirm that the reason we're changing the current policy on this is because the current policy is not right. That's why it's being changed. This is fortunate, it's just got in before the policy is going to change. So, but if this goes through and there's an appeal or whatever, the council policy will be different. So what I'm saying is there's no solid policy which is outrageous. It's going to be changed because its policy is wrong. So and again, and it comes back on the licensing, housing licensing, and I'll ask legal again because we've had this discussion before, Mr. Chairman, if you recall, about how does housing, if it gives a license, how does it enforce the license? Whether the room, how many people are in the rooms. Can we live in the real world here? You could have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, up to 12. That's all I'm saying. I don't know whether it's 6 or 12. But we don't know, and it can't be enforced. So we should not be going by a policy which we know is unenforceable. Because when we had this discussion before, I forget which planning officer was there, but they said, well, in essence, it can't be enforced unless you stand on a corner checking people who come and go, and they might be visitors, they might be an occasional overnight stay or whatever. So we know that policy is not enforceable. So that policy shouldn't be there, in my opinion. It's a fraud, it's false. That's what I want to say on that, Mr. Chairman.
So in summary, we've got a problem with the size of the bedroom, which may or may not pass, if approved, the licensing regime. The real question to me is an emerging policy around car parking a justification for refusal?
No, I accept, Mr. I accept that. I know it isn't at this point. Or I'm just trying to assist the committee by saying I don't want people to think, well, we've got a policy which is wonderful, and it's saying no, this is allowable. I'm just alerting the committee to the fact the policy is being changed because the current policy is wrong and it doesn't work. So I wouldn't rely too much on that as a matter of fact.
Sorry. Very, very quickly, we have to be very careful here because we're talking about difference between policy and guidance. Your policy is policy 4. The Streetscape design guide is guidance and therefore cannot be blanket refusals or aspects along those kind of lines. You must always start, as we've said a number of times, with the consideration of the development plan, and that is policy 4 of the development plan. And then you move into, well, how do you interpret that? And that's where guidance comes in.
Chair, through you. The issue of the quality or otherwise of the residential accommodation is something that you are perfectly able to exercise your planning judgment on. I would suggest that you're cautious about including any highways-related reason for refusal, because not only do you have to, whether it's policy or guidance, not only do you have to make your decision based on what exists now and not what might exist in the future, however critical you might feel like being of an existing policy or piece of guidance. I think there is a risk that at the very least a highways refusal reason would be very, very difficult to defend if the decision was challenged. I have a slight concern about the potential risk of costs as well, but I'm not saying that to try and deter you. Equally, it's a matter of planning judgment, but I would encourage you to exercise a bit of caution on that particular point, but the concern is well understood. Thank you.
Thank you. The point is well taken. I think what my chief concern is always going to be the private space available to each resident. It's no good saying they can escape into the other public spaces, well, more public spaces within the building. They don't have enough private space, I think is what I'm concerned about.
On the basis of the size of the bedrooms. It would have been done. It's been done. Over to you.
Okay, so we've got a refusal contrary to officer's recommendation for refusal. So the motion in front of you is to refuse the planning permission on the grounds of the quality of the residential accommodation and to delegate to the Corporate Director of Planning and Governance, subject to consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair, to confirm the final wording of the grounds and the decision notice. So if we can have all those in favour. Six. And those against? Two. And do you have any abstentions?
Three.
Sorry, is it three? Three. Were there any abstentions? Okay, so that's passed.
Thank you. Right. Alan, are you happy if we hear Aldi first, being as Councillor Udall's here? Yeah. We're going to move on to agenda item 14, Aldi Tybridge Street. Welcome, Councillor Udall. But before you speak, you'll hear from the officer. Crap. It's not working. It's a squeezed Aldi.
Oh, that's Aldi.
That's Aldi.
Thank you, Councillor. This is an application to changes to condition 7 of P15K0134 to alter the delivery times from the approved 7 o'clock till 11 o'clock to 6 o'clock to 11 o'clock, i.e. an extra hour in the morning. Members may note in terms of the reports that the extension has already been agreed previously on a temporary 12-month period, sorry, wrong way, for the Aldi. That has resulted in no complaints and no issues being raised or complaints being raised to Worcestershire Regulatory Services or even to the Planning Department, as far as I'm aware, about noise or disturbance to nearby residents. Something's happened there.
Your holiday plans, are they?
I don't know how I did that.
I got in. There's a cricket going for you.
Did look more interesting, I have to say. So I can, you. So there we go. So we have had, obviously, again, these are the plans that are in your reports. But again, that just shows the difference between the load or the distance between the loading dock and the nearest dwelling. And finally, there is a picture of the loading dock in itself. As I say, Councillor, the condition or the 12-month period was granted because of COVID, but it's shown to show that there's been no problems as a result of that. So that's why we've included the COVID statement, so to speak, in terms of the being flexible in terms of hours and those kind of aspects. But as I say, as no problems have arisen, our recommendation is that those delivery times can continue in perpetuity. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't be calling in this kind of application, but these aren't normal circumstances. You've heard that there's been no problems. Well, I dispute that. There certainly have been problems. The reality of the situation is residents didn't know they could complain about them. And now they do know that, and now they will complain if the problems persist. I think it's worth pointing out that one of the nearest housing blocks to this Aldi store and this delivery area is Dancock's House, which is a very sheltered housing accommodation. Adjacent to that is Seven House, which is one of the high-rise blocks, which is sheltered housing accommodation, and within the immediate vicinity there's roughly between 400 to 500 residents who live in sheltered accommodation. This is a sensitive area as a consequence. We're talking about some residents with Parkinson's disease and dementia and other disabilities, who some are dependent on home care provision even to get them up in the morning, and sometimes that can be as late as 10 a.m. before they arrive. They will be woken up and are woken up at 6 a.m. and have to wait for their home care assistants to get them out of bed, and it's a disturbing wait for them in that process. So it is a very noise-sensitive issue. The acoustics aren't always horizontal, they are vertical as well, especially in this location. You can stand on the 12th floor of the high-rise flats and hear a conversation below. So it can be very noisy listening to any problems. We're talking about the potential of crashing and banging of roll pallets, running engines, vehicle reversing noises, and all the other noises which come with delivery of goods and services to a retail establishment. I think residents are quite happy to put up with a 7 a.m. delivery start, but 6 a.m. is far too early. Bearing in mind, we all know from our own experiences that 6 a.m. will probably mean 5:45 by the time the vehicle arrives and is waiting for the 6 o'clock deadline to open up for delivery. So all I'm asking for is some sensitivity to the location, to the geography, to the residential amenity of the area, awareness of that, and to allow them to have some peace in the morning and not to be continually disturbed by a delivery vehicle arriving at 5:45, waiting for delivery at 6 o'clock, rolling and banging of roll pallets and the vehicle noises at before 7 a.m. in the morning, which would not normally be tolerable anywhere. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. You say that you've had a number of complaints from residents, and why weren't they prepared to complain to the council rather than just to you? Have you any idea?
Yes, because basically they felt, what is the point? Nothing's going to happen. They also did not understand that there was actually a restriction on, there was only a temporary issue on the planning conditions, and thought it was something they simply had to put up with because they lived next door to a supermarket. The reality is somewhat different. They weren't aware of their rights, and they weren't aware of the reality of the situation. They now know that, and they will now be more prepared to make their feelings known. It's also fair to say that they have probably been, in the recent weeks and months, distracted by other potential pre-planning applications in the area, which have concentrated their minds probably more than this has. But they are aware of this, and they are very upset and angry about the potential of this being permanent.
I worry about these people, whether they exist. I'm sure they do, but it'd be lovely if we had some evidence of that. But I have sympathy for what's being said, because I know that when the co-op used to do something, which is just over the road, used to do something similar, and their refrigeration vehicles, what you only call them, used to turn up early, couldn't get in, and used to leave the engine running at afternoon. I know what an annoyance that was to people who lived in Hemwick Road. And so I have some sympathy for limiting the time for which the deliveries can be made.
In answer to that question, Chair, I can assure you I would not be wasting my time coming here if the complaints hadn't been received by myself. I've got a lot more interesting and wonderful things to do. I'm here simply to represent the residents I've been elected to do that job for, and I can assure you they have come to me. But Councillor Roberts is absolutely right. The co-op delivery times are restricted, which is just the other side of the road from this, are restricted, and they cannot deliver before 7 a.m. And that is under Environmental Protection Act order, which has been served on them in the past. So that already exists with one supermarket in the area, albeit how long that will be there for is a different matter.
Looking sort of for a way forward, I think, you know, we've had this sort of thing at the planning committee before now, and we've granted just a temporary change to see how that goes and to see if any complaints have arisen from that. What do you think the residents in the area would think to that if it was put on for, say, a change for 6 months? We're going through the summer period, so the mornings will be lighter anyway. And then at the end of 6 months, review it and see if there have been any complaints. I think it's possible to do that.
I understand that's been the situation as it is already, but they've had 12 months trial on this, and it has caused irritation, it has caused problems. I've received phone calls from people at 6:30 in the morning saying I've been woken up by these vehicles, coming down here and stop them. And in all fairness, it's not something which I was prepared to do at 6:30 in the morning, but it is already an issue, and it's already a problem, and the trial has already been undertaken.
I think it was under COVID that the delivery times were extended, and I assume that regulation is now coming to an end. But I think if we can, and I'll talk to officers in a minute, go for a 6-month trial, residents will understand that that's their opportunity to complain if they've got a problem, and we could look again in 6 months. Is that a reasonable prospect?
Chair, through you, the applicant has applied to make the hours permanent. I think in situations like this, if committee isn't inclined to approve that application, then a way forward might be to defer the application for us to go back to the applicant to make them aware of your concerns, and see whether they would be willing to amend the application to seek another temporary period. I'm sure that's not what they really want, but if they were to say no, we want the matter to be considered on a permanent basis, then it would come back to you, and then you could determine it on that basis. But the applicant hasn't sought a 6-month or a further 12-month period. Sorry, I know that's stating the obvious.
I recommend refusal on that basis, Chair.
Sorry, Owen first.
Defer.
Defer.
I've got Owen and then Jenny.
I was going to say, if we defer it and it goes back to them specifically so they can have this conversation with us and they can come back and say, well, you know, I don't know, if you put words into their mouth or whatever, and they come back and say, right, well, we'll do a 6 months trial. 6 months seems like a long time to me. I mean, that's half a year. I would be more inclined to say 3 months.
Through you, Chair, I understand the point. I'm mindful of the comments that Councillor Udall has made, that I suppose what we're trying to arrive at is a situation where there is a period of time for those residents to let us know if they continue to experience problems because they haven't been expressed to us in the consideration of this application.
Owen?
My point is just that if this is a problem for someone, it's a problem on day one, and then they've got 6 months of headache. So it seems to me the shorter the temporary period, the better. Because if you've got a problem with it, you're not going to suddenly have a problem with it on the last day of the 6th month. It'll be from day one for half the year.
Bill?
Thank you, Chair. How do the residents perceive the noise that Aldi are supposedly generating compared to the noise that is already in St John's around this area? This is a really busy area surrounded by relatively fast moving roads, vast amounts of traffic lights at which the traffic comes to a halt, and then it's 2 or 3 minutes before it moves off. There's engines running, there's motorbikes revving, there's HGVs with coolant compressors running all the time. So that must surely impact on the residents 24 hours a day. St John's isn't a quiet area. It's a busy, thriving area with a vast throughput of traffic. Now, I fail to see how Aldi, which is shielded by brick buildings, has that vast an impact on the local residents, none of whom that I can see have actually complained in writing. These are so-called verbal complaints. So, you know, I'm a little bit concerned that we're exaggerating the noise that Aldi is generating, if they're generating any at all, compared to the noise that exists on a day-by-day basis from very early in the morning till very late at night. It's a very, very noisy and busy area. So, you know, I wonder what the perception is of Aldi's noise on the impact of the noise generally. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
It's unhelpful that there haven't been any complaints. But I think that if we say go for a 3 or 6 month trial period, they will say that we're non-determined. Now, we've already gone beyond our application due time. We're due to be a decision on the 8th of March. It's been agreed to the 28th of March, and I can see that if we don't actually come to a conclusion today, it will be taken off our hands. There was a good reason why 7 o'clock was originally put down, and just because we had a temporary situation where the hours got varied doesn't mean to say that it should be a permanent feature. So I think we should, in this instance, reject the application on that basis.
I know each application is judged on its own merits, but I can recollect an application at the top of London Road along by the Ketch roundabout where a new supermarket came, and there was concern expressed then about early deliveries, and we said, oh no, it will be all right, you know, all sorts of measures have been put in place to stop noise. And what happened a few months later is that there was a whole row of houses who complained and said every morning we're woken up by these deliveries. It does happen. when you're looking at something on paper, it's not always very realistic as to what it's going to be like when it actually happens. And I'm inclined to agree with Jenny. I think we should say no here. I think 7 o'clock to be woken up by the sounds of a delivery lorry is quite early enough.
Yes, I agree. I was about to suggest actually that we should amend condition 1 to 7 o'clock and go back to the 7 o'clock time. That seems to me a lot more acceptable. And perhaps a trial period of 3 months would work quite well. Actually, do we need to do that? We probably don't need to do it. Sorry, we probably don't need to do the trial period because it goes back to what we were doing.
I recommend refusal, Chair.
Yeah.
But going back to the original,
Returning
to
to 7
7
o'clock, as we originally decided.
Yep. We have a proposer, a seconder. All those in favour?
Refusal.
Refusal.
Just to be clear, Chair, we're going to delegate the authority to the Corporate Director and Planning Governance in advice to confirm the final wording. Can I just see again who was for refusal? 5. Those against? 4. Any abstentions?
Carried. I thought we were doing quite well up till now.
Sorry, what was the question?
What was the answer?
Yeah, it was. There were 5 in favour of refusal, 4 against refusal and 1 abstention.
Owen. Yeah, sure. Hobble off. You don't mind if we start then?
Just, I think Margaret's looking across, suggesting we just pause.
Yeah. Define.
Nice word, Alan. Yeah, but sustainable is a nice word.
Yeah.
Tracking sustainable, that's all.
Manor Farm, Early Years Centre. Over to Andrew.
So, thank you. So it's important, obviously, we all know, I believe, well, most of us know the Manor Farm and obviously varying planning permissions. It's important when we consider these variation of condition applications that we concentrate on what is actually within the red line and don't get conflated with other kind of activities and areas. And if I just go one on, you will see here this is the aerial photograph from Google. You can see there at the bottom you've got several glamping sites and all these kind of things. So these are outside the consideration and the ice cream factory and the event centre. All these are outside the red line boundary submitted with the application and therefore outside the consideration. So when we're considering the variation to this condition, it's important that we consider what's in the red line and how that affects obviously the material considerations. I think what's set out in the report is pretty thorough and detailed. I'm not going to go over anything further, councillors. As I say, Manor Farm is well documented as a site and, as I say, has an extensive planning history. In terms of this one, this application as well, which is for variation of condition 5, as part of the report, I've also gone through all the planning conditions associated with this planning application, and it's clear that all the conditions have been complied with in relation to this planning application. So the variation to condition 5, when you consider the recommendation, actually then obviously becomes probably condition 2, I think it is. Because all the other conditions have been already satisfied in terms of that planning permission. I have no other comments or commentary to add to the report other than the application is as set out, Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Hmos.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Mr. Thompson's made one error, if I may say so. What are the current hours of use of the current facility? Unless I've missed it, I can't see it in the report.
There are no... sorry. The current, sorry, 3.3, Councillor.
Current.
So the current hours are 6:30 till 10:30. The variation is seeking to include community use by community groups. It's not seeking to amend this condition. This application is not seeking to amend the hours of operation.
Excellent. Of what the hours are being used for. Is that the gist of it? Right. Well, in that case, just a few comments, if I may then. That's, Mr. Thompson's quite right. I mean, he's given us the context of this with the big red line. And I think it is important to have the context so that we can come to a fully informed decision. And I think, as Mr. Thompson, I think it's what he said, it's a site with a long history of unauthorised working, genuine and consistent complaints from residents, enforcement action, retrospective applications, and so on and so on. So obviously within that context, I think it's important we get to the bottom of what these, the new use would be for. It says community groups. Now, are we talking about the church? Are we talking about rave-ups? Or is that old-fashioned? I don't know. Or whatever they do these days. And that's whatever they do, I don't mind, but it's just we need to know. Because we've got on this site, Mr. Chairman, this is 12 planning applications so far. It's not going to end there, of course. But importantly, we've got 10 objections. So clearly, there is concern by local residents about what this is going to be used for. 10 objections is a lot. I know it's not number of objections, but nonetheless. And if you look at their concerns under paragraph 6.1, it talks about existing controls should be applied. And that's what I say. Given the long history of this, where there's unauthorised working, retrospective and lack of enforcement action, you can see why residents are possibly concerned. And then it says, what are the types of community use, which of course is my question. And obviously their concern is about noise, light and disturbance from whatever the use is, because it's not so much the hours, if the hours aren't changing, it is what's going on within those hours. And I'm intrigued by the last bit of paragraph 6.1, is 30 supporting comments. Now again, this is historical, Mr. Chairman, because you have been around as long as me, probably longer, actually. But you will recall when we have these applications, there's always lots of supporting letters. Now, I don't know any of them, but they usually don't live in the area. They live miles away. Some don't actually live in the county. And it has been suggested that they're friends, family, and employees of the applicant. I don't know whether that's true or not. But clearly, if somebody doesn't live in the area or doesn't know the area, I think we've got to be careful what weight we give to their comments, because you wonder why they're writing in. It does say, and this is a question from Mr. Thompson when I finish my comments, the facility, it's support offered by the facility and wider social and community benefit. Well, I'm not quite sure what that means again, so I'm just asking, what does that mean? The wider social and community benefit, because it talks about in the definition for community groups. And I've noticed how that has now become social and community groups. And given the context of this whole site, I personally, Mr. Chairman, I've got no objection to farming agricultural diversification. But what's happened already is pretty extensive. It is next to a well-established residential area, a quiet residential area. And so, obviously, I think we should be concerned about what these community uses are for. I would be amazed if they are social and community groups, the word social bothers me, whether they're actually going to finish at 10 o'clock at night. Because believe it or not, Mr. Chairman, I wasn't born yesterday. I do not think for 1 second an event is going to close at 10 o'clock on a Friday or Saturday night. And finally, 7.16, it says, the amendment to the planning condition would not significantly alter the use of the building. Oh, come off it. I mean, we've been asked to change the use to basically anything, but it won't alter the use of the building. So in that case, then, what are these things that it's going to be used for? So my final question is, paragraph 8.3, I think I've mentioned it, it talks about those who have written in from goodness knows where they live or who they are, significant social benefits. Again, Mr. Thompson can tell us what those significant social benefits are. I suspect they're not going to be church meetings or poetry reading classes. That is the concern, and that's what I'd like to know before you can possibly make a decision on this.
So let's go to what the National Planning Policy Framework defines as social, and in the 3 tranches of sustainable development. And I'm just going to 7, which says that the social objective is to provide strong, vibrant and healthy communities by ensuring sufficient number and range of homes and can be provided to meet the needs of present and future generations by fostering well-designed, beautiful and safe places with accessible services and open spaces that reflect the current and future needs and support communities' health, social and cultural well-being. That is what the social objective in the MPPF outlines. In terms of the comments received, I've said the wider local area because pretty much all the comments, bar I think one, have come from Worcester residents, and have come from people who say they are using the facilities and that these provide a safe environment for families, children and the local community to come together. This is just one of the comments, to provide valuable services which support groups that otherwise struggle to find a home within the local community. It is completely vital that these permissions are granted, and it is absurd that local community groups have had to be placed on hold when they offer such support for vulnerable adults and children. And it continues, as I say, that they hope that these permissions will be granted. And again, those are from people in Worcester and the wider area. So I think we have to be careful, as I say, obviously there are residents who live directly adjacent to it, and as I said, this is not just this is one planning unit on 4 or 5 different planning units, and as I say, we don't get, whilst there may be enforcement issues that we will continue to investigate and continue to monitor and manage, and myself and the head of planning, Mr. Rudge, liaise frequently with our enforcement officers to ensure that the investigations are responded to. And from my perspective, in terms of what the applicant is proposing, is as a set out, is to allow community groups that wouldn't necessarily, and that could be churches, it would be under use class F.2 of the use classes order, where they don't fit in with a purpose in terms of sales or other type E uses which would be commonly found in the town centre or city centre.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I just briefly follow that up. Right, so we've got a nursery, which we're told at the moment is open from 6:30 in the morning till 10, Monday to Friday, and from 8 in the morning till 10 on Saturday and Sunday. That's the nursery. I'm maybe a bit old-fashioned, I'm sure I am, but I don't think nurseries normally operate those hours. So I can only assume it's open for those hours because it's already being used for other purposes. I mean, a nursery doesn't open at 6:30 on a Monday morning. It doesn't stop at 10 o'clock at night. So obviously, if it's got these hours, it's being used during these hours for other purposes. So this is why I'm confused by this, because if that is the case, and it is, then why do they want to vary the condition, since it must already be, I mean, if it's not being used for social and community uses at 10 o'clock at night or 6:30 in the morning, what is it being used for? And why have they got those hours? Because, nurseries don't normally operate those hours. Again, perhaps I'm out of date, and they do. So, and Mr. Thompson mentioned the list of supporters. Perhaps he could tell us how local some of them are. I mean, are they WR2, for example? And how local are they?
Again, Councillor, without going into the specific every single one, I've got WR2, WR4, WR13, and as I say, WR2, WR5. Again, these are WR2, WR14. I think, as I say, they are residents local to the area. I think in terms of if you look at what we're applying for here, paragraph 3.2, we set out what the current condition is, and paragraph 3.3, we set out what the proposed condition is. I don't see a fundamental or significant change, but it adds precision to the actual condition, in my view.
I'm sorry to be straight, Mr. Chairman, but perhaps other members understand, and I apologise if they do and I don't. But if it can operate from 6:30 in the morning to 10 o'clock at night, it's being used for something other than a nursery, clearly. Therefore, why do they want to vary the condition to do things that they're already doing, for which they already have permission, because they're the hours of operation?
Well, that's my question explicitly is 3.2 Roman 2, proposed community use of a building, including hours of operation. So what were the hours of operation that they are now trying to make into 6:30 till 10 and 8 till 10?
So the approved condition doesn't detail that, but we have agreed that is those are the hours that were agreed as discharge of condition. So that is as existing, and the community, as I say, it adds precision to part 2 as to what is approved.
So the hours aren't changing?
The hours aren't changing, Councillor.
So we're talking preschool education and for...
Through you, Chair, if you could just bear with me a moment. I had something up on screen which relates to the use classes order, but I've just lost it. Okay. So, through you, Chair. A children's nursery falls within Class E of the current use classes order. A use which is as a community hall or a meeting place falls within the current use class F2. I appreciate you don't have in front of you what I've got in front of me, but just to explain, Class F2 contains a number of elements, one of which is a community hall and meeting place, but it also includes a shop of not more than 280 square metres. It also includes reference to outdoor sport and recreation, and it includes reference to swimming pool or ice skating rink. Now, those other elements aren't relevant to what you're looking at this afternoon. I think a possible way forward is for us to try to add more precision in relation to reference to the use classes order, because particularly for any future, should there ever be a need to consider enforcement action, referring to the use classes order is very helpful. But I'm not sure this is something that we can resolve this afternoon. So on that note, my recommendation to you is to defer the application, allow us to discuss this particular matter with the applicant or their agent, and then bring it back to you with a little bit more precision. Thank you, Chair.
I'll move that, Mr. Chairman, but in the discussions, Mr. Rudge or Mr. Thompson, or whichever of us that has, I think it would be helpful for the sake of future committee meetings and whoever is on the planning committee at whatever time, that the point about unauthorised use, enforcement action is emphasised because, well, obviously I assume we're going to withdraw item 12 as well. Are we? No? Okay, well in that case I'll save my comments for then. But the point is, in the discussions on this, I think it is essential, given the history of this site, that if the use is going to be changed, we may agree not to, but if we do, then the hours are as stated. They're not optional, because what I fear is going to happen, and I'll bet Mr. Roger a cost of coffee, that it will be a matter of months before we're here talking about complaints and enforcement action, because that's been the history of this site.
It looks as if this application is to regularise something that's already happening, and I think we need to understand what that is. But 6:30 in the morning drop-off of kids when you start work at 7 seems quite logical, actually. So I think that point is not a problem, but they need to understand exactly what's going on now and what they propose for the future.
Okay, so just to clarify, the motion in front of you is to defer for clarification on wording of the condition. Can I have all those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you.
Agenda item 12 as a separate issue? Yeah. It is, yeah, quite. It is. Have we got a PowerPoint on that?
Yeah, just
right.
quickly, Councillor. So, members may recall, we, under Plan Commission 19/4/00195, there was, we approved a plan that showed 4 and this is relating to 6 bollards in the Planning Commission relates to 6 bollards. Sorry. Apologies. The Planning Commission relates to the approval of 6 bollards within the car park of the early years centre. The plan submitted or approved showed 4 bollards, which are the ones shown at the top there. What we have done is also get a plan that now shows 6 bollards, and those are the other 2 which are shown at the bottom, shown as 2 additional lighting bollards. And again, the Planning Permission restricted the hours at which those lighting could take place. The applicant is proposing or requesting that the condition be varied to allow from, again, the operating hours of 6 through to allow people to be able to use the car park in times when lighting isn't good, and to allow the use of those 6 bollards. It is not seeking to introduce or reintroduce the lamppost, which was previously rejected. It is talking about regulation of the 6 bollards, and for just avoidance of doubt, there's the aerial photograph. There's the details of the bollards, and there are the bollards which are in situ in terms of the 2 additional bollards which are on the southern boundary. That is the matter, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question to Ms. Thomas, to regularise a situation. What situation needs to be regularised? Because they've got 6 bollards, presumably they've got planning permission to use 6 bollards.
The issue we have is, whilst the planning permission says 6 bollards, the condition or the approved plan shows 4 bollards. So what the application, so that there is that element where we can improve the decision, so to speak, under condition of the approved plans. But what they are asking to do is vary the hours at which those are done, from which would remove the seasonal aspect from the hours and have the hours as set out in the report, Councillor.
Just check for that, Mr. Chair, if I may. Have they not got planning permission for 6 bollards? Because if they have, then it stands to reason that they can use those lights for the permission that they already have. Did they have 4 to start with, and another 2 have suddenly appeared, and they're trying to slip in another 2 under this application?
No, they have planning permission for 6 bollards. The problem is the plan doesn't show that was approved, doesn't show the 6 bollards. The plan actually only shows 4. So whilst the development description, which says we've approved 6 bollards, and the conditions say we've approved 6 bollards, the plan doesn't show that. So the variation being applied for is to remove the seasonal aspect, as I say, and to have the bollards being capable of being in operation from 6:30 till 10 o'clock on Monday to Friday, and 8 o'clock till 10 p.m. on the weekend, on Saturday and Sunday. So that, whereas previously there was a restriction that could only happen between March and October.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, as I understand it, then what the application is about is, at the moment, whether there's 6 or 4, they can be on 7 till 7, Monday to Friday, but not at weekends, and not during the give or take summer, spring, early autumn period. Is that correct? Yeah. Right. So what they now propose then is that they're on throughout the period of Monday to Friday, 6:30, which is earlier than the current 7 o'clock. They go on to 10 o'clock, which is 3 hours later than currently. In addition, in addition to those extra hours, Monday to Friday, they also want 6:30 to 10 o'clock on a Saturday and a Sunday, when obviously the nursery is not in operation. And also, Saturday and Sunday is new, and those hours on Saturday and Sunday are from 8 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. So the new thing then is that it's weekends 8 till 10, and the new hours Monday to Friday is from 6:30 as opposed to 7 until 10 instead of 7, and getting rid of the period 1st of May to the 1st of October. In other words, instead of half a year, a whole year. Well, that is a pretty significant change. Presumably, Mr. Chairman, when we agreed before 7 to 7, Monday to Friday only, not at weekends, and just not between May and October. In fact, I think I remember the meeting. There were good reasons for those hours. Now, so what Mr. Thompson can tell us, what has changed so that now it's throughout the year, 6:30 in the morning to 10 o'clock at night, and Saturdays and Sundays, whereas before, when we agreed 7 till 7, that was considered appropriate. I just noticed, I didn't just notice, I noticed before, that these hours are identical to the application that's just been deferred. Was that just a wild coincidence? Wild coincidence, Mr. In other words, why now, if we're treating them as separate applications, can we defer that, but we extend the lighting, which is clearly designed for that other thing to be open those exact same hours? Or is it just a coincidence?
As we've already stated, Councillor, the hours for operation were not being changed by the previous plan condition that's been deferred. We would, as I say, we were varying the wording of other aspects. We will go away and make more, again, further precision to that. But the approved hours of the building are 6:30 till 10 and 8 o'clock till 10 on Monday, on the weekends. So there is no, it does correspond with the opening hours, but those opening hours are approved and there's no breach of planning control as a result of those hours.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, in that case, my final point then is that whether permission is granted or not, it seems to be, frankly, given the history of the site, academic whether we grant planning permission or not, because it's going to happen. But so could I just draw members' attention to paragraph 6.1? Just reading just down the last bit. It says, because the residents have put in various points of objection, which nobody's mentioned yet, but there are four objectors. And the response to each one from the officer is, it's subject of a separate investigation. Subject of a separate investigation, enforcement action. Subject of a separate investigation, enforcement action. Subject of a separate investigation. It doesn't give me any confidence that whether we grant permission or not, they're going to do what they want. I think it's appalling.
I'm not quite sure I agree with you, Councillor Hmos. I mean, clearly they have breached some current conditions and that those issues need to be enforced and investigated. What we have here is a separate, but I understand related application, which stands or falls on its own merits. And the enforcement's ongoing and as issues at this point. In fact, it's not for us to consider, is it? Jenny.
Thank you, Chair. I remember doing a site visit for this the first time round, and the Narnia lampstand that they proposed at a great height that would have invaded the privacy and peace of neighbours. And we decided that they couldn't have that item, and we did agree to the bollards, which at the time were based on the use of the building and to prevent light pollution, both for the neighbours and for the wildlife, which is why those hours were come to. I'm aware that there is the other application in, and it's quite clear that they want to have it so the car park is safe for the people using the building. However, as we're taking this on its own merit, I don't think we should vary from what was there before, because we put those conditions in for a very good reason, and I don't think that situation has changed. There are still neighbours, there is still wildlife, and on that basis, we shouldn't be changing it.
Forgive me, I'm a little bit confused. I don't understand what these bollards are doing if they're turned on in the day when it's light. I'm sorry if can someone just explain to me what they're doing?
The restriction is that they can't be used outside those hours. It doesn't mean that they will be automatically on during those hours.
I think Councillor Barnes, as always, has made a very good point. It is my question to Mr. Thompson. If these are considered as separate applications, forget that the hours are remarkably just coincidental by sheer chance and fluke. If we're considering it separately, then I would recommend refusal because, as Councillor Barnes said, the conditions that we imposed are exactly the conditions that the hours we imposed reflect the conditions that applied then as apply now. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed at all. Therefore, why would we change the hours of the lighting when nothing else has changed? It doesn't make any sense. I know, in fact, that this is to do with the other application, but you've told us we've got to consider them separately. And we're taking them separately. That being the case, I would recommend refusal because I don't see any reason given why we've got to go from 7 till 7 to 6:30 to 10 throughout the year and now Saturdays and Sundays as well. There's no reason given.
Through you, Chair, if committee is moving towards a refusal of this application, it will be important for you to articulate the reasons for refusal relating to planning grounds, and I'm sure you'll be able to do that in a moment. It's worth bearing in mind that one of the potential benefits of approving the application would have been to provide the council and the applicant with clarity over precisely where the 6 bollards are, rather than just 4 of them. So it's just worth bearing in mind. I'm not suggesting for a moment that that needs to colour your determination of the application this afternoon, but we would still have that lack of clarity over where those 2 notional bollard lights would be. But we would just need you to articulate the reason for refusal. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just looking at 3.5 where it says that their reason for making this application is to facilitate safe and convenient access arrangements to and from the facility from its car park. And I'm thinking of a situation where we turned this down and somebody falls and has an accident and then they turn around and say, well, it's the council's fault because they wouldn't allow us proper lighting and so we couldn't see what we were doing and somebody's driven over somebody's foot or somebody's fallen, broken a leg. So, you know, if you just look at 3.5 on face value, it is a sensible reason for asking for longer lighting hours because you want to keep everybody safe. And as far as nuisance is concerned, I can't see that this is very much different to living opposite or next door to somebody who's got lighting, you know, movement sensitive lighting outside their house and CCTV, and the light keeps coming on in the night when the wind blows and moves a few trees or bushes. These things, it's something we live with. This is modern day living. That there are better lighting facilities, and if people want to light their premises, then they're entitled to do that. I'd just be concerned that somebody might have an accident because we've refused lighting at a particular time.
Following on what Councillor Hodges has said, that the reason they gave in 3.5, is that exactly the same reason that they gave before? Because to put the bollards in the first place, because if it's the same reason, we're back where we started, that we still don't know what's changed. So what was the reason they gave for putting these 6 lights in the first place?
It's a fair question that Councillor Cleary makes, Mr. Chairman, but I think you and I are both long-suffering members, and I remember the debate about this, and Councillor Barnes is right. We did a site visit, and we had a site visit because there were numerous complaints about all this, you know, multitude of lighting going on this site for a car park which is next to this, you know, the nursery. I mean, you're talking miles through mud and sand and whatever. I mean, it's just right around the corner. And in that discussion, which we've already had at that meeting, we looked at the hours and we said, and Councillor Barnes made the point, well, perhaps people have got to come early to drop their kids off or something. So we said 7 in the morning, but then allowing for everything else, we still said 7 at night. And this is such a big change, as I say. It's not a marginal change where you add an hour on because it might get a bit dark. All these facts that we're discussing now were known at the time then. And I think we need at least to be consistent, because if we're going to change a decision, there've got to be reasons for it, and there is none given. I mean, you know, you could, the same argument by analogy would be, if you don't put a pedestrian crossing where I want it and somebody falls over, we're going to blame the council. Well, you had zebra crossing every 10 yards, wouldn't you? So I think we've got to be consistent, Mr. Chairman. And you know, this is actually important that we've had the discussion, the debate. We went to see it. And one of the reasons that we decided on those hours was simply because of the representations that we heard from the neighbours. You know, we can't just say, oh, they live near Tough, they can just put up with it. They do matter. They lived there. They've lived there longer than this, you know, this ever-expanding entertainment complex leisure centre has been growing. That's why we put the hours on. But, you know, to go from 6 months to a year, to go from 5 days to 7 days, to go from from 7 to 7 to 6:30 to 10. Who are all these people using this facility? And we still haven't been told who are using this facility. So, you know, I think we've just got to be fair, actually, for once, to the residents. That's all I'm saying. They've made objections. We've got no reason to change our policy other than that somebody wants to change the lighting to fit in with another application, which Mr. Rush said we can't consider. It's because it's separate.
Chairman, with respect, I didn't say that you couldn't consider the previous application. I just recommended, for the reasons I gave, that you deferred consideration, which is not quite the same. As far as...
What I said was, you said that they are separate applications.
Which they are, yes.
Separately.
Yeah. Exactly. Yes, okay. Through you, Chair. I mentioned a moment ago about articulating reasons for refusal if you're minded to refuse the application. So I think, to put that in other words, it's about identifying the harm that would be caused if this proposal went ahead. So we do need you to just set out those reasons. Thank you.
Well, impact on amenity, and as Councillor Barnes has said it quite fairly, impact on wildlife as well, plus all the other lighting around. So I think the lack of impact on amenity and impact on wildlife are pretty strong, because they were the reasons we discussed before, same reasons.
My only comment would be, if we're going to look at the reasons for, and we also need to look for the reasons against, but Joe's point about safety, because if you've been there, it's a fairly uneven surface to wander about on. I can see some logic to actually going with the application as it stands, but that's my own personal view.
Thank you. I just wanted to compare paragraphs 3.3 and 3.4. In 3.3, which is the existing situation, we're saying, amongst other things, that during the summer months, they can't have the lights on at all. But in section 3.4, they can have them on any old time they like. And I just think that it will be good to preserve that bit of text that says, you know, you can't have the lights on all the time. I mean, I don't know what kind of lights these are, but I would hate to think of electricity being burnt willy-nilly in the middle of the summer, which they can't, you know, which is something they can't do at the moment.
Sorry. So it's gone back. Sorry. Oops. Yeah, sorry. That one. That's it. So Chair, through you again. So the reason for the hours as currently stands is for to safeguard the amenities of neighbouring residents in accordance with SDW 21, and not in relation to wildlife considerations. So you would be introducing a new.
All I'm saying, Mr. Chairman, is that we've been over this before. We had a site visit. We gave reasons for our decision. And I'm merely saying we should confirm those because nothing has changed.
I think we should just defer this because this is another example of we've spent an eternity talking about something because we've not been given enough information. And they haven't told us the reason for this because the reason they've given already exists because the bollards already exist for safety. I don't think they've given us enough information. We need to defer it until they can tell us what it is.
Thank you. I understand Councillor Amos's arguments that nothing has changed because he's thinking of local circumstances here. But planning policy has changed. We are required to be very much more positive about our decisions. Now, they're asking for 2 more bollards. I don't think 2 more bollards is going to make much of a difference. I think possibly, Councillor, where your objection might be strongest, if I do say if it's not, is the seasonality of it. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I mean, you know, these whether they've got planning permission or not for these lights to be on, they've been on. That's the point. So I'm not fussed whether it's 4 or 6 because whether they've got permission or not, they've been on. And we've got objections from neighbours. We've got the reason why nothing has changed. I think Councillor Agard's quite right, but I don't think planning policy has changed to the extent that we're now going to leave lights on at 10 o'clock at night because somebody might fall over. Otherwise, you know, I think.
Oh. They need to come on. So they come on at 10 o'clock, the timer turns it off. But in terms of seasonality, if you've got a light sensor on the device, even when the timer says turn on, if it's still light, it won't turn on.
Like you know as well as I do, this is to do with the other application. How many accidents have there been since we gave permission for this? How many accidents have there been?
Chairman, to try and assist the committee, if you are inclined to not support the application and refuse it, you need to articulate those reasons, and I use the word harm because reasons for refusal typically cite harm, which is either a conflict with planning policy or some technical conflict, or it might be that when we talk about wildlife, if there is a particular species where there is evidence that harm would be caused, then we can cite that. So in most cases, but not all, when it comes to lighting, concerns are raised about the impact that lighting might have on foraging bats, for example. But I'm not aware that that is a particular issue in this case where if a decision to refuse planning permission was challenged at appeal, that we could point to that evidence to support the decision. So that's why we're looking to you this afternoon just to articulate those reasons, because there is every possibility that a decision to refuse planning permission could be challenged. So we're looking to make a safe, defendable decision. That's all it is. So I've heard from you that you have concerns about the impact of the lighting proposals on residential and visual amenity, and that's okay as far as it goes. But if there's anything that you're able to add to boost that as a reason, if there is a particular property, or if we were in an area which was particularly dark under normal circumstances, I could understand why the introduction of bollard lighting might be an issue. But bollard lighting typically is shining the light down, and it is at a relatively low level. Compared to, for example, and I'm exaggerating to explain the point, lighting of sports pitches with floodlighting. Now, clearly there's a big difference between that and what you're being asked to consider this afternoon. So as I say, if you are leaning towards a refusal, it's just really important that we're clear about the reasons. Because once that notice has gone out, we can't add or amend to it. Sorry, I know you know that. Thank you, Chair.
I don't think we have any sound reason for refusing this. We're talking about low-level bollards, which will stand about that high. The lighting is pointed down. The Bennett family is not going to put lights on during the daytime and waste their electricity if they don't need to have them on. No business will use electricity and pay for electricity with energy being the price that it is at the moment if they don't need to have them on. So, I mean, as far as leaving them on all day, I don't think that will apply. I'm really concerned about the fact that if we don't allow this application, somebody is going to get hurt. And you're right, it is a very uneven ground, and it's very easy to fall over between coming out of a lit building and moving towards your car and falling over and hurting yourself. So if we decide to refuse this, I would like it put down on record that I have not refused it, because I really think that we are heading for a possible, a named vote. Yeah, I'd be happy to have a named vote.
I think I've heard what Mr. Rogers said several times, and I think first time. I've heard what Alan said several times, but it hasn't convinced me at all. So I ask you to put it to the vote.
Absolutely clear, Mr. Chairman. All I'm saying is we adhere to for the reasons we've already given on the same matter. What was it, a year or 2 years ago? Those reasons were valid and sustainable then, and so they're just as valid and sustainable now. So this is a nonsense. Let's get on with it.
Who's seconding the refusal?
Amenity. Residents' amenity. I mean, there are 4 objections for goodness sake.
And Jenny seconds it. There you go, name vote for refusal.
I might ask Margaret for some assistance with a name vote, if that's okay. Yeah, so the motion in front of you is to refuse planning permission contrary to officer's recommendation on the grounds of impact on residents' amenity, and delegate to the Corporate Director of Planning and Governance, subject to consultation with Chair and Vice Chair, to confirm the final wording of the decision notice and the grounds. And are we definitely doing a named vote? Okay, can I have all those 4, please? Oh, sorry, named vote. So, full refusal.
Full refusal.
Councillor Alan Hmos? Councillor Andy Roberts?
Yeah. Are we serious? Are we serious? We're going to go for a name point on a timing of a light store. We're not. It's not. Okay. I'm against it. I'm against this one.
Can I just clarify we're all in favour of a named vote before we go any further?
I don't really care. I just don't want somebody to break their necks and say...
Are you happy to move for just a normal vote? Yes. Okay. In that case, we'll scrap the name vote if I can just have all those in favour of refusal. 3. And those against refusal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Any abstentions? 1. Okay, so that has failed.
Before you go, Ditta, we now need to have a vote to approve.
Well, I do want my vote recorded.
Proposer to approve? Pat? Seconder? Joe?
Okay, so this time we are voting to approve the permission subject to the conditions set out in section 9. If I can have all those in favour of approval. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those against? 1, 2, 3, 4. Were there any abstentions?
Oh, my name recorded as being
Yeah, recorded. And no abstentions?
No.
Okay, that's passed. Thank you.
That's all right. We are done, I believe. We'll do it all over again on the 25th of next month.
Any other business?
Sorry?
Any other business?
No. Never is. Sorry?
I think Councillor Roberts might have wanted something under AOB.